Hey guys, this is Ori from What Culture Comics, and let's talk about being incognito. There are few places disguises are as important in as comics. Not only do heroes themselves use disguises to keep their civilian lives separate from their crime-fighting ones, but they also often use further disguises to infiltrate their enemies' lairs and discover all their super secret evil plans. However, this doesn't always work. Some of these disguises are so terrible, they practically give away the identity of whoever is wearing them. Some are so bad they might as well walk up to their enemy with "I.M" insert name tattooed across their forehead, and even then would still be less revealing than their regular outfit. When you're an easily identifiable figure anyways, like Wolverine or Godzilla, it seems crazy to just pop on a suit or a trench coat and try to use this as an effective disguise. And it's even crazier because sometimes this actually works. So the next time you see 3 kids wearing a trench coat to try and pretend to be an adult, don't get mad at them. They might just be training to be superheroes, wearing one of these 10 worst comic book disguises of all time. Number 10, Godzilla's trench coat look. I want you to close your eyes. Picture Godzilla from the movie Godzilla and then put a Mac on him. Do you feel like you would not recognize him? No? For real? Quelle surprise. It's a true shame in life that Marvel didn't continue with its Godzilla comic, because the series was an absolute thing of beauty. Wild and weird and deeply, deeply hilarious. Take, for example, the 19th issue of Godzilla, wherein his human friends attempt to disguise him while they have to walk him through New York. In order to try and hide this current 6-foot monster man, they placed him in a trench coat and hat, as though that hides the whole bright green dinosaur thing whatsoever. But as plain as it is to our eyes that this is our favorite kaiju, it clearly isn't to others in the comic, because 2 men then try to mug Godzilla, thinking he's some unfortunate human target. As it stands, he's actually a scaled machine of war, and thus this mugging attempt goes exactly as well for the crooks as you might expect. Serves you right though, really. You should have opened your eyes, because it was obviously a really bad disguise. Number 9, Tyler Marlocke. PS238 is a weird name for a comic series, but once you can get past that, it's a pretty good time. It covers the story of this world's first school for superpowered children, only our hero Tyler doesn't have any powers to speak of. Despite this, Tyler also manages to keep his superhero alter ego fairly well hidden, despite the fact that you'd think people would connect the dots on account of him not having superpowers. You'd also think people would connect the dots because said costume is a black bodysuit with what appears to be a football helmet hastily placed over it. But that's neither here nor there. It's a running gag that nobody seems to recognize Marlocke in and out of his costume as the same person, showing this is a case of the series gently parodying the trend of terrible disguises in more serious comics. Number 8, Matches Malone. Now, it's worth saying that in many Batman comics, the Dark Knight has jumped through every hoop possible in order to make sure his gangster persona of Matches Malone doesn't clearly look like Bruce Wayne. He gets a skin mask to change the shape of his face, changes his voice through extensive training, wigs, you name it. In other comics, however, he's pretty blatantly Bruce Wayne with a fake moustache and some sunglasses. To be fair, the leap many would have to make to presume this criminal is instead of course Bruce Wayne in a fake getup, pretending to be someone else because this is how Batman gets info, is pretty wild. So it isn't too crazy to think it would work as a disguise. But it's also not exactly what you'd expect from the world's greatest detective, given that half of the time his great disguise could be purchased for under 10 quid at any local costume store. Yeah, I'm gonna need some more effort from you, Bats. Number 7, the Captain. All right, give me a second, I need to just laugh this one off. All right, let's go. As far as disguises go, taking the first word of your 2-word hero name and then crafting an outfit exactly the same as your original, but with a different color scheme is not all that great. Although hilariously, it's also maybe not the worst disguise in comic history. This was the questionable espionage choices of Captain America when he went under the mantle of the Captain. How creative. You have to wonder if Marvel were hoping that nobody would ever really remember and look this one up. Indeed, you'd arguably have a better time simply getting a picture of Captain America changing the colors on Photoshop or Paint, however you live, and then renaming the resulting image The Captain in your head. It's a bit lazy, am I right? Number 6, Deadpool's A.I.M disguise. Deadpool is commonly not the stealthiest of dudes. partially because he wears a bright red costume and partially because he tends to solve things with his swords and guns instead of sweet sneaking abilities. This is best shown in Death of Wolverine, Deadpool and Captain America, where Deadpool attempts to convince an advanced idea mechanics or AIM worker that he's one of them by placing a seemingly used yellow trash bag over his head. It kind of works. The guard presumes that Deadpool is his co-worker goofing around and asks him to quit messing about so they can get back to work, which is mercifully a request cut short as Captain America subdues him while he's distracted. It's almost a shame though, as you do wonder how long Deadpool could have actually managed to pull off his disguise. Number 5, anyone wearing a domino mask. Now I feel like this one is fairly self-explanatory. Show me a superhero who wears only a domino mask on their face that you cannot recognize. And I never understood, where do their pupils go? Now it's gotta be a pretty insanely difficult thing to get yourself a good costume as a superhero. If you can't find your Edna Mode who's good enough to make a perfect costume and quiet enough to keep it a secret, your options are to get really good at making your own clothes. And with that being said, this is the only reasonable explanation as to why heroes wear domino masks. Because they cover absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing worth covering. Because in the big scheme of things, your eyebrows and cheekbones aren't exactly the features most people identify each other by. And thus covering them and only them is a waste of time. In fact, it's arguably worse because it tells the person who sees you that you don't want to be recognized, but you've also done exceedingly little to actually make yourself unrecognizable. How someone as intelligent as Batman let any of the Gotham Knights use this as their disguise is beyond me. Number 4, The Flash, Golden Age. Nowadays, the Flash has one of the more effectively concealed identities in the DC roster. A mask that fully covers a majority of your face is practically not only for concealing who you are, but also for making sure the poor speedsters don't get windburn basically all over them. But this costume wasn't always the one used. In fact, in the Golden Age, when the Flash was Jay Garrick, this costume actually had no mask whatsoever and thus concealed precisely nothing. The idea was that the Flash used his super speed powers to constantly move around, meaning that you could never quite get a solid reading on what his face actually looked like, as even when he was stood still, his features would still be vibrating and thus blurry to us mere mortals. This in theory sounds like a fairly solid plan, were it not for one thing, it relies on the Flash literally never being subdued. If he is properly stopped for 1 second, the jig is up on his secret identity, and that's a bad time for everyone involved. Thankfully, the older age of comics were more concerned with having the Joker say the word boner and wacky hijinks than ruining Jay Garrick's life, so this never became a huge issue. Number 3, Black Widow. Putting aside the MCU for a second, where they did away with the importance of superheroes retaining their secret identity, as seen in the first film, where Tony Stark proudly says at a press conference, "I am Iron Man," comic books are slightly different. The idea of a secret identity is definitely a lot more important. When you take into account the whole trained since birth to be an expert in espionage and murder thing Black Widow was going on, it's fair to say she knows her stuff. This is why it's slightly confusing when she takes a series of very public superhero jobs, since it's very hard to be a very good spy if everyone in the world knows you're one of those Avengers folk. Really, Natasha is lucky that the Marvel Universe must have an obscene number of beautiful people in it, as this is the only logical way that people who have seen the Avengers, so everyone, don't immediately recognize her when she goes incognito without changing her hair or face. To be fair, you have to give her credit for the fact that she ostensibly manages to pull off so many spy capers while having one of the most iconic faces in the world, if not a good part of the universe. Number 2, The Thing's trench coat look. Mercifully for our funny bones, Godzilla is not the only very identifiable being who has donned a trench coat and wide brim hat in order to try and sneak around. Because Ben Grimm is also a long-time user of this method of hiding himself, having worn this to try and disguise his rocky flesh from the general public, even though his face was still fairly plainly visible. In a nice twist, this would later be retconned, with it being explained that everyone knew they were interacting with the Thing in a trench coat, but that many respected him so much that they simply didn't tell him how terrible his disguise was, sensing he needed to feel comfortable, which is, all things considered, surprisingly heartwarming, or at least more heartwarming than any other story about a suspicious man in a trench coat you might have heard. And number 1, Patch. Being Wolverine looks pretty dang hard. The worst jobs are always given to the poor guy, and the most awful things tend to happen to him or otherwise his adamantium skeleton and claws. Although it's not exactly cool that Wolverine has historically run off from the X-Men to get some milk and never come back more than once, you can understand why he does it, even if that doesn't excuse it. However, while you can understand him going incognito, it's slightly harder to understand how people don't immediately recognize him, because in his time as Patch, Wolverine dons an eye patch, sheaves his claws, and sometimes puts on a tuxedo. That is literally it. As you might imagine, this has all the disguise prowess of someone making a cotton ball beard and saying they're Santa. Only actually the cotton balls are significantly more effort than Logan put in. So the fake Father Christmas would win this round. Sorry Weapon X, we know it's you. And that brings us to the end of our 10 worst comic book disguises of all time. Do you remember any that might have been worse than what we said in this list? Well, go to the comment section and let me know. Also, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to What Culture Comics. My name's Ori and you can catch me on Twitter at Ori Styler. And until next time, take it easy guys.